Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest, Maggie Craddock. And she's here today to share with us her new book, Lifeboat, Navigating Unexpected Career Change and Disruption. Now, Maggie has done executive coaching with clients at all levels on the professional spectrum, from people reaching the vice president ranks for the first time to Fortune 500 CEOs. She has been featured on CNBC, National Public Radio, and quoted in national publications including the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, and the Chicago Tribune. She's also been the author of several nationally syndicated articles on behavioral dynamics in the workplace, and her work has been discussed in Oprah magazine. So let's welcome to the show, Maggie Craddock.
Well, thank you, Marianne. I'm delighted to be here.
You know, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this new book. I have to ask you, because I know you've written other books and you're very well known for just helping people to look for that next level. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, I think I've always realized, Marianne, that the skills that people need to stay on course and advance when it's business as usual aren't necessarily the same skills they need under pressure, right? Because under normal circumstances, most of us are logical and hopefully fairly strategic. But under pressure, our thinking can get polarized. We can get pulled into black and white judgments and just swamped by emotional triggers. But the trick to this is most people don't want to know what they'd prefer not to know about themselves under pressure. They get a little defensive. There's a tension between learning what we need to learn under pressure and evolving and just sort of wanting to put those walls up because we're feeling overwhelmed. And a great story helps us take that step back. Well, the Titanic is just such a great metaphor for unexpected change. We're seeing it pop up in the news all the time, almost like a meme in conversation. And that's because at the human level, there are those questions that those survivors ask themselves that we find ourselves asking today as human beings. How bad can things get? How long will this last? Who can I trust to help me survive? How will it change me? So I think that it's taking that step back with stories and realizing that this one really helped people grasp how the skills they need when the pressure gets high enough are sometimes very different skills.
Well, I'm sure during this time, people are kind of feeling like they're hearing the orchestra play as the ship is sinking. So
we can go on and on. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and especially during this, here we are in this pivotal time in history, especially in American history, where people are having to make dramatic changes. What are some of the key things that you see that people come to you for?
Well, I think one of the main things is many people coming to me today say, it's all changing, Maggie, and I have more questions than answers, right? So the old norms don't apply. The things that I learned in the past about playing my role, staying the course, keeping my head down, just staying busy aren't really working. And so they're looking for ways to think of how to make that shift in mindset to an environment where they have more questions than answers. And I think for a lot of people, Marianne, this really causes them to make a little bit of a shift in terms of always caring about the human dimension of how they're relating to other people in the workplace and in their lives, but realizing that that has to be much more powerful than the transactional dimension when sometimes the goal has shifted just from more and more profitability to sheer survival for a lot of people with all this stuff changing. So they really want help in terms of how they stay present, how they take those strategic pauses so they can align with their thinking and feeling in the present moment, and how they keep identifying just the next step that will keep them moving in the positive direction, so that they can get through this period and set themselves up for success and beyond and not get overwhelmed by what's going on with everything around us nowadays.
I think overwhelm is where a lot of people are finding themselves, which I find, it's just like human nature. There's so much going on. And I love how you use the analogy of the Titanic through the book, because it really makes sense. I mean, here it's a very survival based kind of feeling, and I think when people are going through really difficult times, they kind of feel that way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just to, a little bit more on your previous question, when people were on the Titanic, I think one thing to remember is the things that took that ship down didn't just start when it hit the iceberg. It started way before they left port. So that whole mindset of the Titanic was a larger than life impression management. This can never happen to us kind of thing. They're speeding through the icy waters of the Atlantic faster than they needed to. And before you know it, again, at a human level, you have people that were on a ship that many people thought was unsinkable, and now they're all huddled together on this lifeboat, literally trying to beat the elements to save their lives and pulling together. And you can see how the dynamics that played out among people are some of the same ones they face today. We have to figure out what we need to do not to freeze under pressure, to be able to tap into inner strength, to be able to be emotionally agile enough to deal with different personalities around us. And then I think when we talk about the shifts in mindset that are so profitable when we look at our challenges today, one of the things I stress a lot in the book is making the shift in organizations from what I call the self-help mindset to the us-help mindset. And the self-help mindset is where so many of us, for understandable reasons, are really focused on our individual security and advancement. We're concerned. But that shift to the us-help mindset is where we realize these are bigger problems. This is a bigger conversation. And we really learn how to balance what we're looking at in terms of our strengths and our advancement with how we contribute to the value of the greater good of others. And I think that type of mindset is what really pulls us through in our careers and in our lives.
How important is that? My goodness, to make those, perspective shifts can make such a huge difference. In your book, you talk about the lifeboat process. What is that, if you'd like to give us a little rundown on that?
Absolutely. The lifeboat process looks at the shifts we make internally and externally to help us develop these new skills we need to address unexpected change, as opposed to just falling back on what has worked in the past. So one of these new skills we look at is this idea of, how important it is to have a strong relationship with yourself. Because I'm always reminding people that it's the relationship they have with themselves that's going to make it possible for them to chart their own course in their lives and careers and not have this dictated for them by outside forces, right? But when we're playing a part that's been scripted for us, and you think about all the parts that were assigned on the Titanic, from your ticket price to where you were in the crew, but when we're playing that part, an unexpected change just erupts. Sometimes we can go into that automatic pilot. We've been trained to keep our game face on. We've been trained to minimize things. And when that happens, we can move into this internal cycle where we're not in the present moment. We're creating sometimes a very polarizing narrative in our own heads that justifies the way we're reacting, right? So, of course, I'm being impulsive right now because we cast ourselves as the victim. Or, of course, I'm, whipping off this webinar right now because. So we cast ourselves in some kind of role that justifies this extreme reaction, and we're kind of going in circles. One of the first shifts that really helps you fortify that relationship with yourself in the lifeboat process is learning how to tap into that inner strength under pressure so that we can acknowledge what we're feeling, but we don't let it capsize us. We learn to sort of take those incremental pauses so that we're able to make tapping into this part of our internal wisdom, and we're able to identify positive things we can do in the present moment. One of my favorite examples is on lifeboat number 6. There was a famous character, Margaret Brown, who saved the day. She was a civilian and ended up, becoming the informal leader of that lifeboat. But she solved a problem in the present moment when she noticed that the women on that boat, most of the people on the boat were women, were too weak to pull the oars through the water, and everybody thought that they were doomed. And she organized them 2 to an oar. She figured out how to do this while the handful of men that were on that boat were kind of caught up in a power struggle. I always tell people I don't think that Margaret Brown thought her way to greatness. I think she aligned her thoughts and her feelings in the present moment, and greatness sort of found her, right? And then the next shift we make is we're trying to tap into what we're actually feeling, not minimizing this, spotting red flags when we need to, is getting the feedback we need, not just on the decisions we make, Marianne, but on the quality of our decision-making process. Because under pressure, it's not any one decision like, do I stay at this job or leave? Or do I hire this person or that person? It's the fact that the decisions and choices keep on coming because there's so much change. So as opposed to some of the feedback we're used to getting, which is kind of task-oriented, how am I doing in this role or how am I doing at this project? The Lifeboat process encourages people to look for people that they trust and respect at a human level and get feedback on whether or not they're being true to themselves under pressure. Like if they're describing a situation, you don't want feedback on what you're doing. You want feedback on whether or not you sound emotionally honest as you're framing the problem, or if maybe they're feelings that you're trying to suppress because you're not quite sure how to deal with them, right? Or are you being clear with yourself about your motives in a particular situation? Or is your assessment of a difficult person fair? Because again, when it's all changing around us, we need to truly be centered in the present. And we learn a lot from this because the challenges we're facing right now are really just giving us relational lessons that if we embrace them, will not only help us through this period, they will definitely set us up for success once we've moved beyond it.
I know in your book you talk about, asking questions like, is this ship safe? Mm-hmm. And so when we're doing that, a lot of people that got on the Titanic, they thought, hey, this isn't going to sink. We're good. But, it's interesting as we use this as an analogy in the business world. How does someone determine whether or not they have a safe ship?
Well, I think, Marianne, what's really helpful is to look at when you think of the ship as your company, to look at it two ways. First, obviously, as a financial enterprise, right? You want to make sure that there's a good business plan and there's a good reputation and senior management is agile and able to course correct reasonably well. But you also want to look at a firm as a corporate community. Because let's understand, if you invest the prime years of your energy and your life working for an organization, it's going to impact your sense of self. The group energy of any organization that you join will impact your personal life. You can't just, even when we're working from home, you can't just power down your computer and leave that energy behind you, right? It'll impact your values, your norms. We talk all the time about aligning yourself with organizations that reinforce your core values, and if necessary, of course, making a healthy break with those that don't. Because these are things that also go to, is this ship safe? We all need to make a living. We all need to be careful and balanced in our relationship with money and how that impacts our overall choices in our careers. But you also need to understand that the place where you work, where you make that journey, is going to shape your sense of possibilities in terms of your self-respect and what you believe you're capable of achieving.
I love how you talk about really our core values and how important it is that we don't have those alter when we're going through difficult times. Because I think that a lot of people, when they're going through really difficult or strenuous times, find themselves maybe considering things that they otherwise would not, that go against their values.
Oh, absolutely. And I think those are very costly mistakes when that happens, because when we start talking about this issue of making the shift from a self-help approach, where sometimes you can rationalize cutting corners if you really believe that your individual survival is temporarily on the line, and you sort of tell yourself in that momentary rationalization, you'll make it up some other way. But really, we've got all sorts of examples from the Titanic and from the business world today about why it's so important to stay the course around your values. I mentioned in the book that everybody says people matter, but people really matter at a very human level when we're facing this level of unexpected change. And when we talk about some of the things we align with values in the book, we talk about really being genuine about making sure that your words, your stated values, and your actions are congruent, particularly under pressure, that you're walking your walk, that you are When you're joining an organization, you're seeing whether or not this is rewarding from the is this ship safe point of view. If you're in a place where things like having a sense of empathy and giving other people room to make the mistakes and the benefit of the doubt is something that's normalized as expected behavior from the senior management level, and it trickles on down. And I think one of the ways that we summarize this in the book is we say, let's not strive to look good, which is, of course, our impression management skill. Let's strive to be good. Because as people pull through this, one of the things I say is, what will be your story? And as people look back on this historic period, if they're leaders, they're going to wonder what leadership legacy they will have left as they navigate this period on behalf of their employees. If people are out there struggling, wondering how to manage working from home and what's going on with their careers, they'll realize when they look back on this period in the rearview mirror, Marianne, this was a historic period, and how did they navigate that? What's the legacy they're going to have in their lives for how they pulled through this period?
You can't be more true than that, because when you look at it, it's all about legacy. It's all about the impact we have on other people and the stories that we leave for them, because I feel that, and you probably see all this as well with the work that you do. I think people are really kind of assessing, does this job match my values anymore? Do I need to make a different change? And so when people are probably in a sense where they're like, gosh, I'm questioning the values my company has that they bring to the table, if that aligns with mine, how does money factor into all this in decision making?
Well, I think it's really important that people think about the different dimensions of money, the way we address a lot of questions. And in the book, Marianne, we talk about one's inner iceberg. We talk about the fact that you can have a challenge and just look at the tip of the iceberg on the surface, right? But there may be a lot more going on underneath that. So when we start looking at money and the role that it plays, then we're going back to that early step about new skills in a time of unprecedented change, because money is a really emotional issue. It plays out on so many levels. And particularly under pressure, people can rationalize overspending in order to keep themselves, feeling on an even keel. They can almost medicate with their spending, or particularly on behalf of their kids, buying things for their kids, right? Or they can suddenly swing and go into major budget mode. But when you start thinking realistically about your career, you want to understand compensation, but you also want to balance what I call your standard of living and all the income streams coming in with what I call your standard of being, right? How you're making a difference, how you're growing skills, how you're building alliances through this period, and the way that you're making those decisions one step at a time. And so, like everything, we encourage people to be balanced, to look at the roots of things, like what's going on with their relationship with money. Is there a certain amount of money that they need to feel safe in what seems like an unsafe world, right? Is this a security issue? Are there any issues around money where they feel pressured to maybe keep up with siblings or people they've worked with along the way? Are they really clear about the amount of money it takes for them to meet their current operating expenses and potentially invest in new types of training if things are changing in their industry? I think it's vital that people take really clear and balanced views on these things, because when you let your emotions around money run away with you, the biggest price you really pay is your unexplored dreams, because you often end up doing what you think you should do to be secure financially in the course of your career. And of course, as we know, there's no job security, really. Things are in such flux, as opposed to what we need people to do, which is make those balanced decisions, because we need everyone's talent. We need their inspiration. We need their motivation. That's one of the reasons I wrote this book. I truly believe if people work through this process, we're going to have the best shot of seeing them approach their careers authentically. And at a time like this, we need all the authentic and motivated individuals out there we can get.
So coming from a place of authenticity, is that what you would suggest of a way that people can find jobs and choose jobs that create like abundance and joy in their life?
Oh, absolutely. And I've used that word authentic before. The very first book I wrote was called The Authentic Career, also published by New World Library. But I think it's very important that people realize that this business of being authentic isn't an idealized approach of how we should be. It's just really getting real and giving ourselves the benefit of the doubt and other people as well. This is a high stress time. And I think one of the most expensive things people do is that they don't take the time they need to really tap into their genuine feelings and maybe the roots of their thought process. What part of it comes from their family system? How did that impact their definition of success? What part of their motivation around money comes from things that they feel that they need to do to keep other people in their family system comfortable? They really need to become as authentic as possible in terms of what's going on with them. And that will help them in everything from the interviewing process when we're operating remotely to the managing and leading remotely. Because when you're genuine in the present moment, let's say you're interviewing, you get beyond these surface questions, like that top of the iceberg that you can see around this is the role, this is my resume, these are the qualifications, and into the deeper questions like what kind of people succeed in this organization? What personality style tends to make it to the top? What kind of individual do you most enjoy working with? What creates chemistry in this environment? How will you integrate with the other people on the team? Because while qualifications are necessary, they're not sufficient because they're not hiring a resume, they're hiring a person. And then you think of how you mentor and manage and lead people. You want that agility to understand that, leaders are always saying, why do people follow me? I'm like, it depends. The different reasons for different people. That's why understanding the nuances of different personality styles under pressure are so powerful. The reasons people feel they belong in a corporate culture, what motivates them, can all be very individual. And when you're able to align your thoughts and your feelings and your intentions in the present, you're not creating these narratives to avoid feelings. You're present in noticing the widest range of things that you can spot that are unfolding with other people and within you so that you're able to address people as authentically as possible. That creates motivation. That gets people to go the distance.
Well, you actually said something that I'd like for you to expand on. You talked about agility.
Mm-hmm.
So in your book, you talk about cultivating emotional agility. Why would we do that, and why is it necessary?
Well, it's absolutely necessary because, again, we mentioned earlier, under normal circumstances, something will make you anxious or frustrated, but we almost don't notice these things, or many of us don't, Marianne, because we've really been trained to put that game face on, talk ourselves off that ledge internally, and just focus and keep moving forward. But under times of extraordinary pressure, that doesn't necessarily work. Sometimes I'll have people call me up and say, Maggie, I can't believe I just did this. I just said something on national television I wish I could take back. Or I just, hung up on my team and now I've got to call back in and I know they're all anxious about what got to me, but I didn't want to lose my temper. Or even more tragically, I'll have a thought leader call up and say, I had my moment to really speak truth to power. And then suddenly I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I was so intimidated. That's not me. I'm like, yeah, that's you. And that's a lifeboat learning moment. Because what happens is the situation breaks down in terms of our relationship inside ourselves long before we're under pressure. And then the moment just takes us to a reaction that actually surprises us. But when we're really doing that work to stay in touch with the emotional triggers we have and explore that piece of the iceberg that's underneath the surface, we're prepared. And we know the narrative we're likely to create and the story we're likely to tell ourselves under pressure so that when the moment strikes, then we're able to remember, recenter ourselves, and operate in a way that we're not just thinking, Marianne, about how we're coming across. We stay mindful of how other people feel about themselves in our presence. And depending upon their backgrounds and their styles, there can be diverse reactions in any one room to one simple statement that either you or I would say.
I know in your book you talk about, you actually shared earlier this one story of, I believe it was Margaret Brown,
Mhm.
who was in the lifeboat, was helping women to go ahead and organize and move forward. So when we look at this, your book in general, I know that it provides such an empowering message for women. What are some of the messages and some of the notes that you want women to take away from your book?
I really want women to understand their own strength and how much power they have to bring to the world. I think one of the things, if I was going to speak in general terms, because this isn't across the boards for all women, but it's for many. Many women are often working so hard and trying to be good enough. And by that, I mean, I've had so many powerful women who are out there in the world stage that say they can barely believe their own accomplishments because they're always processing questions like, am I a good enough wife? Am I a good enough mother? Am I a good enough daughter? Heck, am I a good enough date? Right? And they're working so hard to try to be good enough. And if I could say one thing to women, one of the reasons that this process in the Lifeboat book is laid out so clearly, it's so that people, and women in particular, can give themselves permission to start setting the boundaries they need, not just to go through the external list of things they need to accomplish in a role to support other people, but balance that with the internal work that's necessary to set those boundaries, have that inner alignment, and support themselves. Because as leaders, they want that independent room to be thinking strategically, to be making authentic decisions, to be prioritizing what they really think without second guessing themselves and going for their own genuine passions and cultivating their own authentic strengths. And I think all too often, especially when we're working from home, it can be tricky for women to set some of those boundaries because we have been trained to to wear so many hats and so many supportive hats in trying to help and add value for all the people around us, that sometimes we forget to stop and center and say, what do I really need? And what do I really think?
I love that. I think that's so empowering. And I felt we're not even here. I'm going to have a little bit of a pun here, play on words, but we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg on your book, with all the great information that's in there, which I feel is so empowering for people right now. And I'd love for you to share with us, I think I have time for just a couple more questions here, but I'd love for you to share with us, for our listeners out there who are stuck and just struggling, and there's so many people are going through that right now. What are some ways that they can empower themselves today?
Well, I think that it's very important for all of us to have a very simple process for getting through the day in a positive manner, Marianne, because, we start our days and then before you know it, we're all hit by these shocking changes that seem larger than life and they just keep on coming. You and I were talking a little bit about our respective locations, but I think of all the poor people in California who now suddenly they're shutting down there. Some of these changes are just coming fast and hard, right? And so I do think it's very important, and many people who work in the personal growth area reinforce this. Find something that works for you when you first wake up in the morning to start and center your day in a positive direction. My husband and I actually have some affirmations and some meditation work we do every single morning when we get up. It's really brief. It's only about 10 minutes, but it gets us looking for what is good in the course of our day, focusing on what is positive. And then, of course, we're disciplining ourselves to do what we need to do in the course of our day. Run our businesses from home, support our families, look for work, manage our money, whatever we're doing in this process. And then I always encourage people, just like the people on those lifeboats, have a lifeboat accountability group. Have people that you can reach out to with those questions, not about what you should do, but are you being true to yourself under pressure? Because we're always going to have those moments when we're thrown emotionally in the course of the day. And of course, you can't count on being able to get any one person on the phone. But if you have 3, 4, maybe even just 2 people who you respect, who will be emotionally honest with you and tell you maybe what you need to hear, not always just what you want to hear, right? And hopefully people that may not work in your organization, because people are going to be more candid with you if they don't have a vested interest in the outcome, right? But people you can just have a brief conversation with So you train yourself not to suppress the feelings or avoid them, but just to see them and make sure that you're being clear with yourself about them. And then I think one of the big challenges, and this is a powerful one for women too, is you need to make a firm decision with yourself about when your workday is going to end. Because we've got so many things that we're concerned about right now. And so 6, 7 o'clock, whatever it is, set that boundary, hold that boundary, and stop. Not just with other people who may give you a little flack in the beginning, but will ultimately respect you. If you set boundaries around your time, you, by the way, will respect yourself as well, which is even more important. But set those boundaries within yourself so that when you're off, you're off. And you're taking the time that you not only deserve, but that you need as a human being to replenish and reset. Because I don't think we all realize how much all of this is taking out of us emotionally, again, because we're so trained to be fine and to look good and to compartmentalize. But I think it's important to give ourselves a lot of credit for what we're going through. When we're compassionate with ourselves, that lends itself to being empathetic and compassionate with other people as well.
That's so important because I think a lot of times when people think of compassion, they think about, oh, I'll be compassionate with my husband, my kids, my cat, my dog, other people I come in contact with, but they most of the time don't even consider themselves in that equation.
And I think that's such a great point because right now, when many of us are working from home, it's such a wonderful crucible to learn that skill because I'll tell people all the time, okay, there you are. If you lose an important document right before the meeting or you're on the verge of losing an important client and someone stumbles into your office right at that moment, how do you react to them? Well, that is just a short step away from considering how you talk to yourself under pressure. Are you calm? Do you have a sense of humor with yourself? Or do you have a sharp voice barking orders in your head? Because you want to take control of that tone you take with yourself, because that's going to impact the emotional resilience you need to stay focused and go the distance.
Oh, isn't that the truth? I mean, who needs a drill sergeant, right? Yelling at you.
Right. There you go.
I think most of us have that. It's either that or like a pack of wolves chasing you all day long, where when you set these boundaries, it's like, okay, this is how I'm giving myself love and honoring myself and respecting myself, then people also show up that way.
Well, and we go back to this important question of emotional agility, Marianne, because sometimes when people are overreacting or underreacting to others, right, they're literally kicking up internal adrenaline to distract themselves from internal feelings they're not sure how to process. And it's a little like a kid who's scared there's a monster in their closet and they can't go to sleep, right? If you just face what you're feeling, you'd be surprised how you kind of relax. All that adrenaline kind of goes off and you go, well, yeah, I am pretty anxious or I'm disappointed. It's not the end of the world. You're anxious or you're scared. But then you start looking at where you are in the present. And again, much like Margaret Brown on that lifeboat, seeing what's right in front of you in terms of the resources you have to work with. The other thing is, I really believe, and this goes from self-help to us help, there's no accidents and we don't do it alone. So when you're in the present moment, you begin to realize resources you have, whether those are, technical, relational, financial, or whatever they are, that you're going to overlook if you're too anxious and running on adrenaline. So I often think that this is a great time for people to just work on that sense of being right where they are and not getting lost in a narrative in their own minds, which usually is not, by the way, a comforting narrative. And notice what they have and what they have to work with, because some of the best opportunities come in times of crisis through unexpected relationships, a new way of looking at solving problems in your industry, and all sorts of things that can unfold for people when they work through this process and get a little bit more human perspective in terms of how we're tackling the challenges all around us.
Well, Maggie, I thought your book Lifeboat was such a great read and so appropriate for what we're going through right now. Where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your book and your work and be part of your community?
Oh, well, thank you. You can find me on my website, workplacerelationships.com. You can find me, Maggie Craddock, on LinkedIn or at Maggie Craddock on Twitter.
Well, I know people can connect with you on all social media from your website. That's workplacerelationships.com, and they can find out where to connect with you there and also more about the book. And I wanted to congratulate you. My goodness. I mean, the book was just released on the 4th, and it's getting such great reviews. And of course, why not? I mean, this is the book we need now. Everyone is kind of in this place where they're not quite sure what's going to happen with the future. Well, Maggie, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Marianne, thank you for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Maggie. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Lifeboat, Navigating Unexpected Career Change and Disruption. Lifeboat is available again on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. If you'd like to connect with Maggie, you can at workplacerelationships.com for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.